is guarding something. Police, judicial employees, security personnel, the armed forces, civilian jobs that depend on the Pentagon, makers of security equipment. What does that tell us about the economy we fashioned? That 1 out of 5 people has to watch other people for fear of trouble.
You are listening to New York City schoolteacher John Taylor Gatto. What's the only way out for our children? Stay tuned to KPFK Los Angeles.
If you were to ask me where we're going to go from here, I'd have to say something very bleak as a society. I can't see where the wedge will enter to upset this structure and a new structure other than simply allowing it to collapse of its own weight, which is basically what happened to classical Greece and to Rome and to Egypt, to all the civilizations that we have record of. Some people were aware of what was wrong. Maybe many were aware, but no one seemed able to get their hands on the controls and divert it. So when you're in a situation like that, what do? You turn to an exploration of your inner space. You make yourself, or you constantly make and remake yourself, the best you can be. Not you in competition, but you against yourself or against the potential that's built into your biology or into your culture or into your neighborhood, into your circumstances.
How do you introduce children to that inner encounter with themselves?
But I think there's things you can see about a person and about a person's strengths and lacks just by submerging your own self and watching them closely for a short time. They almost tell you without words what they wish they weren't or what they wish they were. So what I do now is to watch kids and attempt to nudge them in directions I think that'll confront them with the limitations of the self they are. But I don't nag, and if it doesn't work, I push them back out again. I think experience with a certain amount of risk is immensely cleansing, especially when you're young. Quickly you put aside all the nonsense you've learned, and it's you against the biggest book of all, what you can do with this situation. I'm not going to say that in 100% of the cases I see the beginning of transformation, but I certainly see it if I'm allowed a free rein this way for, let's say, a year. I see it clearly in a third of the cases, and I see it in embryo in another third. Let me talk about Mark Bilgray, who now is somebody that you're all welcome to verify. Mark's a real living human being, and he's the best cartoonist for Cosmopolitan and some other things. But Helen Gurley Brown sent him a letter saying, "You're the best cartoonist I have," and he has it framed on his wall. Mark I knew in 8th grade when he was 13, just 20 years ago, and perhaps 24 years ago. Mark was mute. Mark could speak to nobody. He was overwhelmed with, I guess, the shame of being Mark, or the inability to talk to people he wanted to talk to or to represent his ideas clearly. On the other hand, I saw that he was very, very industrious. He'd squirrel himself away under my protection in some corner of the room, and he never didn't have something to do. He didn't hang out vacantly. So in the course of him coming to trust me that I wasn't going to judge him adversely and I wouldn't use my protection of it was art that he was doing as a kind of a club to make him do other things I wanted. As he came to trust me, he said, "What do you think I ought to do?" I said, "Mark," I think you're in the most desperate situation that a human being can be in, because your inability to talk to anybody else is going to cost you comrades and companions, and it'll cost you someone to love almost certainly, and the price it's going to exact from you is so great, and yet how to climb that mountain, I said, is so far out of the range of my understanding at your age. I mean, I know it's tough, I said, and I know that you're not going to be able to do it gradually. And he said, well, what would you do? I said, look, I said, at this time, the Improvisation had recently opened in New York City, and the owners of the Improvisation, the Goodmans, I believe the name, lived in my building, so I knew about these clubs. And they had spawned a few imitators, one of which was Catch a Rising Star in New York. And I knew they had a lineup out front where amateurs could get a ticket, and they didn't screen these people. They'd get to go on amateur night and try to entertain a nightclub audience. So I said, Mark, why don't we put together a comedy routine, and you'll go on the stage and Catch a Rising Star. You'll sit in line all day long, and you get a ticket and you go on stage. I said, and the people will be furious that you're so bad. I said, they will be. I said, but I'll get a table at ringside with my wife and a few friends, and we'll laugh outrageously, and we'll clap our hands while all the other people are booing and throwing sandwiches at you. And what you'll see is the worst that can happen isn't very bad. So Mark goes over to Catch a Rising Star, and he's absolutely paralyzed, though. And he says, at the last minute, I don't think I can do it. And I said, but you've got a tape recorder. I said, why don't you put your comedy act on a tape recorder, and then when you get up on stage, you just press the button and you stand there and let the tape recorder do your act. He said, but people will be, I'll be mocked and humiliated. I said, right. I said, do it anyway. Well, 2 years later, when he was a paid act at the Improvisation, isn't that fantastic? We're talking a mute kid. They paid him. They said he couldn't eat house cake, but other than that, almost all the things that plague us as we learn to either rely on ourselves and be confident, or we learn to basically have contempt for ourselves and to depend on other people, I think we learn by being something other than what comes easily to us. So all these tests have to involve struggle. I used to tell kids until it was coming out of their ears, whatever comes naturally to you. I said, just don't do it all, because you don't need any more practice with that. If I had a kid who could handle himself very well in argument by the time he was in 8th grade in class, I'd take him aside and I'd say, don't raise your hand in class anymore, because you've mastered that lesson. I said, you're as good, and you'll now naturally self-teach yourself to be better and better, and you'll end up being one of the elite 1% or whatever in rhetoric. You don't need a teacher anymore, and you don't need these cheap victories. Other people need the airtime to expose themselves in front of an audience where they're not going to be heard. But you need other things.
You are tuned to listener-sponsored Pacifica Radio, KPFK, Los Angeles, at 90.7 FM. I'm Barbara Dunlap. Recently, New York City teacher John Taylor Gatto shared with residents of Toledo, Ohio, his assessment of what he calls government monopoly schooling. In his view, the ongoing national debate about subject matter, teacher training, and school funding misses the real issue. What are we teaching our children now? 7 deadly lessons, says Gatto. Do they sound familiar to you? The first lesson I teach is confusion. I teach the unrelating of everything. I teach the orbiting of planets, the law of large numbers, slavery, adjectives, dance, gymnasium, assemblies, surprise guests, fire drills, computer languages, parents' nights, staff development days, guidance with strangers you may never see again, standardized tests. What do any of these things have to do with each other? Think of all the great natural sequences like learning to walk and learning to talk, following the progression of light from sunrise to sunset, witnessing the ancient procedures of a farm, a smithy, or a shoemaker, watching your mother prepare a Thanksgiving feast. All of the parts are in perfect harmony with each other. Each action justifies itself and illuminates the past and the future. School sequences aren't like that, not inside a single class and not among the total menu of daily classes. School sequences are crazy. I teach the unrelating of everything.